Hello, today is Tuesday, November 6th, 2018. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle call. We have a couple of agenda items on the list and other things to discuss. So if you want to discuss something in this call, please add it to the agenda. The ACL should be opened up for anyone who's on the mailing list. Starting off 31, Ant 31, I don't know if he's on yet. End cluster management or end user cluster management survey. Is it Antoine or Antonio? All right, we'll come back to that one.
Joined.
Pramesh, adding node local DNS add-ons in cluster creation. Did you want to go first? Oh, I see it.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, this is Pavitra. Ramesh is my GitHub ID.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this after I got the comments on the pull request. I have the link to the pull request. So basically, that the change adds a new feature. It's a new add-on that you can deploy on clusters to help with DNS latency. It's like a cache for kubedns. The change I have is adding support for it in the E2E scripts and GC cluster creation. I was told yesterday that we should support it for all the other tools, the cluster creation tools out there, and to kind of bring up the discussion at this meeting.
Yeah. What is the current state from a feature perspective of the DNS caching? Is it alpha, beta?
It's alpha. It's kind of experimental at this point. We just wanted to add it so folks can play with it, see if it helps with the latency issues that have been reported.
Okay, so then if it's alpha, my request would be to add a feature gate to something like kubeadm. If folks want to tinker with it and to test it as part of their deployers, they have the capability to do so. But if it's defaulted only on GCE, that's not enough for the community to understand what, how to enable it for their deployments, right? And we should probably also have, is there documentation inside of the main?
There's a cap for it. There is a cap for it in the Kubernetes community. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking for end user consumption documentation. So something that on the kubernetes.io website.
Oh, I see. I can add some. There isn't any, and also it's not turned on by default.
Yeah.
It's something you set a plan to enable.
So I think eventually that will be a requirement as it gets to GA. It is definitely not a requirement for alpha. Okay. But it would be nice to have some feature gated enablement and just regularly touch base with the SIG to let folks know who, there are people on this call right now who deploy across any number of environments where kubeadm might be one of them, but Justin's here where he works on COPS, Antoine's here which works on kubespray. There's a number of different deployment tools and not all of them leverage back end of kubeadm, but that's the main upstream control nugget point that a lot of other folks use. Okay. So if you can have a feature gated enablement for that, I will happily unblock that PR.
Okay, okay. And could that come in as a follow-up with just the kubeadm, or should that be part of the first PR when the support goes out at all?
It depends on if there's a tracking issue. Do you have a tracking issue which says enable alpha grade support for deployment?
I'll create one. I can create one. That would be a kubeadm specific issue, right? Like a SIG.
Sure, you can do a kubeadm issue for us to track.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Do any folks have any questions?
I do hope that yeah, I was just going to say, I think this would be great to get into, maybe this would be a good test run for the bundle as well, right? We shouldn't block the PR on the bundle, but this is, the bundle is, I think, our real answer here. We've always had a sort of, we certainly, it's polite to mention breaking changes to all the installation tools, so we don't really have a mechanism to do so. and we've had, like, I don't know if we have previously had a strict policy that you had to get things into kubeadm before you could merge them, right? If they're experimental features or alpha features. I think, I personally think that, like, the COPS API, we don't necessarily want each feature person designing the COPS how that's surfaced. So, like, but we have a different perspective, I guess.
No, I think there's, in the long run, I don't want it to be kubeadm blocking at all. But I don't think that we should be adding it to just GCE or GKE type style deployments without notification to the broader SIG, because there are much more people here across a much larger audience that need to be informed if the defaults changed. And this is one of those scenarios where over time it would, even though it's alpha right now. So in the long run, I totally agree with you. I think bundles is the appropriate place for this to go. I do think that informing the broader SIG is generally useful. And if it's a feature that would apply, I think enabling that feature in kubeadm as one of the standard deployers that's distributed with upstream is also a reasonable expectation for the time being until we have bundles to supplant this work.
I guess it's tricky because of the kubeadm schedule as well, right?
It's the standard schedule with upstream, so there's nothing that's gonna differ there. I'm
right,
happy
what
to.
I mean is like COPS can do this, in 6 weeks, but kubeadm has to do it now.
Yeah, it should do it whenever GCE, the / cluster directory is updated.
So Tim, are you proposing that we sort of block introducing new features that we are trying to test based on kubeadm? That's what it sounds like you're saying for this PR, is we'd like to, or the author would like to try enabling some optional new functionality to see if it's useful. And I feel like the point where we'd want to put in kubeadm is when we flip it on by default. Well,
typically their feature gates are enabled across things that are alpha and beta grade, right? So feature gates for even DNS itself, for core DNS, were feature gated off for a long period of time and then eventually enabled. I do agree that eventually we want to get out of the business of managing this in separate deployment tools and just rev it with inside of bundles. But I think if GCE deployment, which is the only one that manages / cluster directory, were to do something and then all the other deployers don't have a standard way of turning on this feature, that is also not advantageous to the broader ecosystem or the SIG itself.
Well, I mean, all the other tools can add the support for it, like COPS will add support for it because it's definitely an issue that people are hitting, right? I mean,
I'm saying we just open a tracking issue and we can deal with it and we can unblock the PR. So long as we,
I think a tracking issue.
Yeah, so long as we have the ability to track. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had an brainstorm. We should have a distro we should have a mailing list for people that where all the distros can join for like notifications and this sort of thing.
Right, because presumably we'd also want to open a tracking issue for COPS and KubeSpray and each of the other sort of SIG sub-projects, right? Like, I think that's maybe what Justin's point was initially, is kubeadm a different class of SIG sub-project than the other sub-projects, right? If you look at our SIG page, we have lots of sub-projects, many of which are installers. Should we be treating them all equally, right?
Yeah, I think this is a broader question. It's weird in that kubeadm is part of the main KK repo, which is both beneficial and not at the same time. But I do think management of how we disseminate this information is super important. I think that's actually a much broader question that I think needs to be answered. I don't necessarily want to block her PR, just make sure that other people are informed, so that way we can, other installers can solve this problem going forwards. I don't have a good answer, but perhaps we should bring it up with community and Contribex to sort of say how should we manage these sort of meta topics that apply to a much broader group of folks, right? We can open up a single tracking issue in KK or maybe in community. I don't even know.
I would be fine with an issue in some repo somewhere with just the maintainers ping like CC'd on it. I think that's reasonable. I think it's, in the past I've said you got to go open an issue with each project, but I think like honestly that was unreasonable of me. It's just too much work, and it's too easy to miss one and too easy to not know if someone has missed one, right? Whereas,
so how does this sound as a straw man? Open an issue within KK and CC some of the main maintainers for a couple of the key installers. Antoine is on here, myself, and Justin and Robbie. And we can loop in other folks, potentially cluster API implementations that might use something else, because I don't even know. And we should probably send an email to the list. I don't know how we want to do this in the future, but this is going to be a broader problem for us that we should probably start to think about, because as features get promoted, like there usually needs to be a knob somewhere, and the installers control the knobs, right? And eventually over time, if we have the grand unified, what's it called? Component configuration and bundles, it'll be all magical and rainbows. But until that time, we need to figure out a way to loop everyone else into the efforts that are ongoing that could affect their deployments. Pavithra, does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, sure. I didn't realize I was still on mute. Yeah, I can definitely, open the issue, CC the folks. I didn't get one of the names. Is it Anton? Is it on the IDs on the agenda page? Is it?
Yeah, Ant31.
Oh, okay. I'll create the issue and CC the folks on. Thank you.
Okay. Antoine, you were the first on the agenda, but you weren't here. You had a question about a survey?
Yes. So I wanted to ask, like, if there is anything like we did with app definition working group for this application space survey around installer and cluster lifecycle. And if not, would it be interesting to create such a survey?
So I know that Contribex wanted to do this, and we actually talked with them a while ago. I don't know if they formalized anything. Robbie, do you know anything?
The survey was already executed, and the results are going to be out soon. And I see some overlapping between this survey, Antoine, and the one that Contribex did. So if you join the Contribex channel on Slack, I think that you can communicate it and basically gather feedback if this is a plausible survey to publish publicly. Okay.
Okay, so Contribix I've done a survey already, right? Around.
Yes, but I see some overlap, but I guess you can discuss if your survey is also plausible to do as a separate one.
Okay. And if yes, I would like to like just say to contribute to it. Like I think we should discuss the question and the time frame to create to publish a survey, etc. So what?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we briefly talked about doing something like this a while ago, but I don't think we ever actually executed on it and followed up with it.
Yeah, the survey that Contribex are doing is more like oriented towards the base level contributor. If you want to gather like feedback from actual users, this survey definitely has potential. I just I'm suggesting to see if there's any overlap and if they have an opinion on this.
Okay. I was thinking like, okay, we look what I was thinking something like quite more specific to lifecycle. Say, are you using Vault to create your certificate for etcd? Yes or no? What installer are you using? If it's a custom one, what kind of language? Is it Ansible, Go, etc.? So quite to understand more the ecosystem around really specifically lifecycle, or are you using kubeADM, and if no, why, etc. So such such kind of
This is
very
going to be great. Yeah, this is going to be great feedback for us as well. Yeah, for the kubeADM team.
Okay, so I will reach to Contribix to see what they have, and I will probably start a document with like the question we may ask, and so we can collaborate on this, and we go back from there.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Are there any questions, comments, complaints, concerns on that? Silence is acceptance. Justin, you're up next. etcd-ADM approval.
Awesome. Yes, I think my microphone is very laggy, so I apologize if I'm talking over anyone. But yes, I sent we have the etcd-ADM KEP, which has been out for a couple of weeks now. I think we sent it to the SIG cluster lifecycle mailing list and sort of started a lazy consensus. I didn't see any disagreement. I think we sent it to the etcd mailing list as well. I guess I've sort of lost track of the process, but I guess the next step is to approve it and create a sub project if we agree. Honestly, I don't know.
I think we were just holding out for, I was fine. I think we were holding out for Robbie and final vote. I know that you said you wanted to review it, Robbie, last time.
I did. I still haven't had a chance to, and I don't want to hold everybody up. If everybody else thinks it's a good idea, I am willing to go with the majority there. Since I promised I would look at it and I haven't. So
why don't we?
What are we looking for final vote?
We could just do informally here on the call because it's recorded, and just say like +1 or non-vote, and just do a timeout of like a minute or so. So if folks have any comments they want to add, they can just say add them in the chat channel.
I'm about to paste the link to the KEP for Anton. So.
Oh, I just found it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So why don't we just do a quick vote here by a show of +1s. We'll time out in like 1 minute. If there are any dissensions or -1s, please add a comment with details why, and I'll just pause.
The challenge, of course, is that anyone that's typing a dissension reason will take longer to type.
Between where we what's going to be like how the certificates are going to be managed, basically to create the CA. So should we copy the key to all?
Sorry, my laggy mic again. So we're starting with etcd-ADM, which is a command line tool from Platform 9, which I think essentially does you are manually responsible for copying it, and then we're building automation on top of that. But there will always have to be some form of, and even with the automated layer, there will always have to be some form of authentication. I think Tim was suggesting doing something involving the Bootstrap token, if I recall correctly. But honestly, I don't think we have a crystal clear design yet on how we can make that smoother. I think if you have any good ideas, like I think you mentioned Vault integration, like I think we would love to be able to make that supported.
I have no specific ideas. I was just thinking about if you want to really reduce the number of manual action. I think this is something I would not want to say everything is automatic, but you still need to copy this certificate and key, and also it's just lower a little bit like where the key is from the root certificate. It's on all this node and etc.
So, I mean, etcd ADM modeled itself on kubeadm in terms of the join semantics. So I think there's definitely potential there for, you know, we decide on a sufficient token and then we enable you to grab it from the master when you join. We'll have to figure out the details of what sufficient is, but I think that could
I would really prefer to see something like that. I know it's probably more tricky because scaling etcd is different than scaling not, but yeah, that's just my comment.
There's actually some great stuff coming from etcd itself. I think they're working on non-voting members, which should make it much easier to scale because you sort of can scale it separately from the quorum management, whereas today the two are sort of intertwined, but that's an aside.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns?
Well, I've had a chance to read it now that you guys have been talking, and I had a couple of questions. The graduation criteria is it will be considered successful when it's used by the majority of installations. How do we define, is it pure more than 50% for majority, and how do we define the installation tools that we are measuring there?
Is that a graduation criteria or a success criteria? I can't recall which one I did.
It's called graduation criteria, which I'm not sure what
I would hope it would be. Right. I would hope that it would be universally adopted type thing. So I don't think, like, I'm not hoping that it will be a debate type.
Okay. I mean, because you also mentioned under the constraints, it's unlikely that the hosted solutions like GK and EKS will adopt it. And in some ways, if they do, we won't know, right? And unless those people step forward and actually say that they're using it. Because etcd management for hosted solution is an implementation detail of that solution, right?
Well, yeah, and it also has, like, all the hosted solutions have an external source of truth which they can rely on. So,
yes,
and presumably have their own automation systems. Yes, I should probably clarify that to be open source installers. And I guess one of the ways we could do that is to look at the ones which are sub-projects of SIG cluster lifecycle and any other important ones that come up. But I don't know whether any would. But yeah,
I think the list of cluster lifecycle sub-project is quite small, so maybe you can just list them on the gradation criteria. So this is like basically what we are looking for.
I mean, at a minimum, right? Like kubeadm, COPS is going to do it. I don't know whether. I don't know about the other tools. Whether you're like, I don't want to. I hope everyone will adopt it. Is sort of the way I'm going.
Sure, but I think what Anton was saying is if we just say, you know, bootkube, cluster API, COPS, I don't know how active kube AWS still is. Kube deploy is in maintenance mode, so we don't care about that. Same thing with KubeUp, kubeadm, KubeSpray, and maybe Minikube, right? Like those are kind of the main ones that we feel like actually have momentum going forward. I don't know about kubeadm DIND cluster, Kubernetes Anywhere we probably don't care about. So I think the list is relatively small of the projects that we are sort of targeting, right? They're the open source cluster installers that are sub-projects of SIG cluster lifecycle.
I mean, COPS, Minikube, kubeadm, and KubeSpray as the main targets, and nice to have the rest of the list. I mean, that's my proposal, at least.
I'm happy with that list. Yes. I find graduation criteria are always a little bit soft or a little bit fuzzy. So, but yes, I'm happy with that list.
Well, I mean, is there still a notion of graduation, right? We don't have the incubation process anymore. Are we talking about, like, at what point would we decide as a SIG to stop maintaining the tool? Like, I mean, what's the purpose of graduation criteria?
It was in the cap. I think it's the short answer.
We could go through the standard. We could go through the standard phases of promotion. Like we could say etcd ADM is alpha grade. We could say etcd ADM is beta, and then we can say etcd ADM is GA. And I think that level of bar of when it gets to GA, I think is actually a meaningful bar.
Sure, we can say that for it as a sort of standalone tool, but I think that's separate from it being integrated into the other tools as a building block. And if the criteria is based on it being used as a building block, that's different from criteria for when it itself should be considered beta or GA.
Fuzzy. I mean, yes and no, because you could feature gate it, right? So like,
I mean, it depends on the target audience, right? If the target audience is cluster installers, then it's itself being GA doesn't really make much sense if nobody's actually using it, right? And if the target audience is end users using it directly in the manual mode, then it doesn't matter if cluster installers are using it so much.
I think we should have a single state for the tool. And this includes the backend that potential deployers can vendor as well.
Justin, were you going to say something?
I was just like, I just don't know what graduation criteria does. So I was a little fuzzy on what it meant and sort of what the thing was. I did write, the draft I'm looking at says, considered successful when it's used by the majority of OSS cluster installations. So I guess by OSS cluster installations, I clarify cluster installations made by OSS tooling rather than.
I mean, these can be hundreds, you know, there can be hundreds of these tools out there.
Right, but the majority of the clusters is what I was thinking. So yes, but yes, we're not going to have a survey. We're not going to know if there's some dark pool of Kubernetes clusters in some data center run by the NSA somewhere, right? We just don't know. But yes, so if anyone can think of if we want to say is used by COPS and KubeSpray and Minikube and KubeADM and X and Y, then that works for me as well. That works for me as well.
So in the KEP template, under graduation criteria, it says we don't want to have umbrella issues where we have like a checklist of things we need to do to say that this is done. And that's sort of what is supposed to fold under graduation criteria. I'm not sure so you could literally list out like COPS uses it, KubeSpray uses it, etc. Right?
The original notion of how to use KEPs, it's a weird constraint of this particular problem, in that KEPs was originally designed to replace the feature process for alpha, beta, GA promotion. So that way it was clear to all folks who were looking at the KEPs that this is the canonical source of truth for the features, and that because it was programmatic, you could rip that out so you could see a global set of features and what their current state was.
The release teams still need some sort of a umbrella issue to track. That's how they decide like the state of what is the state of a feature, and we need to have one for etcd ADM, I guess. I'm not sure. Maybe this process is going away.
So it sounds like the biggest conundrum or question is like, what does the process look like? Not necessarily disagreement on that we should have this as a sub-project, but logistics of how we disseminate information, which I think is probably fine as a TBD at this point and probably needs refinement within the KEP itself, the KEP process itself. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. I'm
happy to add.
That seems almost like a meta topic, which we should potentially bring up with Arch, and not necessarily related to this particular thing, but could apply to several folks who are trying to do stuff. I will put it on the Arch list. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Otherwise, it generally has a +1 from everyone else. I'll say going once, twice, 3 times. All right, closed. So it generally seems like folks are in agreement. general vote is +1, and there's no real dissensions other than the process needs to be refined for how we promote stuff. Last topic that I have currently on the list, and feel free to add more topics as we talk. Juju charms, where should they live and why?
Yes. Hey, I'm Kevin. I put there on that agenda item, there's a tracking issue to figure out the right place for charm-related work to live. Right now, it lives in the cluster tree, right, which is not an ideal space for it. The reason this issue came up most recently was because we had a sort of a large push, a large merge that we wanted to make back upstream. And we had been doing a lot of work in a fork of the Kubernetes tree so that we could get around things like code freezes and just our own development process. So when we put that merge back up, it was very large and raised some flags about, hey, this isn't the right place to be, and we agree with that. So we're looking for a new home, whether or not we're in the Kubernetes org or the Kubernetes SIGs org, just trying to solicit feedback on the right spot.
So I had a meta question, and I don't know the answer to this. Like, it'd be nice to know. It'd be like, who are the target consumers of this that's not just Canonical? So like, are there other folks on the SIG that'd be willing to sponsor the work or want to have a common home where you'd have a community that's a shared community within this group? So typically there'd be like a number of shared interests, like SCD-ADM has almost every installer would like to be able to use that. So there's a shared group of folks who are willing to help maintain this and work on these things. Typically as part of an adoption for a new project or sub-project inside of the Kubernetes SIGs org, there's an owner's file list of who are the core maintainers and interested parties who are going to help contribute and maintain and keep this up to date so that it's not just something that would folks push over the wall periodically.
Sure. So I don't have a good answer for that. I'm happy to look through the SIG list and figure out who I think would be ideal co-maintainers. Certainly Canonical would be the primary one that would be interested in putting Juju-related source here. So I can take that to find, sort of that co-maintainer spot.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about that both, regardless of whether you talk about it within the Kubernetes org or the Kubernetes SIGs org, because as Tim was saying, in both those locations, we expect the projects to sort of be community maintained and node by CNCF. Is there a reason that you wouldn't want to just maintain this out of tree and just have your own release cycle, within like the Canonical org?
Sure. So we started this, and when we first put our source up, we likened the Juju-related bits to COPS, Kubernetes Anywhere, stuff like that. And so we just sort of followed what other projects like ours were doing. So that was the initial motivation to get us landed in some way related to the Kubernetes orgs. I think it makes sense when people use Juju to find the charm source living alongside the other Kate's projects, just because we do touch a lot of them. So cloud providers, for example, AWS, vSphere, things like that. I think it just makes logical sense to see the project side by side like that.
Just to put on the record, so I think COPS, if we were setting up throughput today, we'd stick it into Kubernetes SIGs. And Kubernetes Anywhere is on its path to the Kubernetes attic once we can get it there. All the new stuff we're creating is under Kubernetes SIGs, and that's where all sort of the SIG sub-projects ideally would live. And there were in some discussions with the great folks, since they're an incubator right now, about sort of where they should end up. So I think if between those two, I would certainly vote for it being under SIGs instead of under Kubernetes.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, usually the biggest problem is if we introduce end-to-end tests related to Juju charms. and eventually somebody pings us about some test failures, we need to find the maintainer to take a look at these. And by also introducing like maintainers to a Kubernetes 6 repository, we also look for the same thing, like we need to know who are the maintainers, and they have to be responsive if they want this project to be sheltered on the coastal lifecycle. That's the problem, basically. Maintainers responding to topics. That's
right.
So a typical way to proceed forward here that other sub-projects have done is create almost like a shell repo with some of the details and percolate information and other information inside of the owner's files and solicit, send an email to the SIG requesting information about like other people are interested in maintaining. Please look at this separate repo with this owner's file listed over here. And then folks can comment on it and then propose just like a voting similar to what Justin did. So that way they can be added as a sub-project without, much of issues going around.
Okay. I'll take that.
So are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns about that one? Good ones.
Just
I think everyone will be.
yeah, just as you say, I think it's quite important to see who are the contributor, and should be like really mixed in the community and separate several companies behind to be, I think, sponsored by the SIG.
Yep, I agree. Justin, we'll pause because you got the mic delay. You're going to say something?
I put it in chat. I was just saying, I think everyone will be very happy to have one less tool in the cluster directory of KitK.
Yeah, it's quote unquote deprecated for some version of deprecated for everyone else other than GC. So hopefully someday over time we can get GC off that too as well.
Yeah, it's still only there for GCE for EDA tests, right? We just need something else to replace it with.
Last topic that I just added was state of testing for deployment tools and namely around kubespray, and if anyone has any update with regards to changing PR blocking jobs to using things like kind. I might just follow up with Ben later on, but right now a big gate for getting PRs merged and everything else is like you have all these deployment tools that deploy all over the planet, and sometimes the signal's not the best, right? And it makes a lot more sense to have some of these things be periodic signals than it does to have it be PR blocking for every PR. And that way you put the maintainers for those other projects on the hook for managing that signal. Because some of the problem with some of this other stuff is you get flakes. Providers are like the biggest source of flakes. Who knew that idempotency and APIs were a thing? But I don't know if anyone had any thoughts about that one, which was about the kind bit. The second bit was understanding where the current state of the kubespray integration was.
I didn't understand the kind thing. Sorry.
So kind, the purpose of integration with kind is to take out some of our PR blocking jobs. We have so many PR blocking jobs, it's kind of bananas now. So every time any user submits a PR or any developer submits a PR, it goes off and it basically deploys clusters for all of these different providers. And then it also runs the end-to-end tests and gets back the signal. But the problem with that is that it's very flaky. It's notoriously flaky. Especially if it's done on a per PR basis. It's like the law of large numbers applies. Like if you have any one problem, you're guaranteed to find it on a PR blocking job in Kubernetes because there are thousands of PRs. So it just becomes a source of bad signal, a lot of noise. So that's the kind one. If anyone had any updates there.
Maybe I can talk about both. For the CubeSpray PR that was submitted for test infra, I read a lot of comments, and the submitter was River Zank. So the big problem there, like Ben already said, is we are lacking a CubeSpray deployer for kube tests. So that's like a plugin that has to be written, and somebody has to find the time to do it. And yeah, that's the big problem.
Yeah, I was not responsible for the PR, but is there any way to do it the opposite? Like just say we try this image and we report the status rather than starting a job that's going to do everything on the CI. Because right now we have already our CI in place, and we're going to use it also on bare metal, on Packet, and different provider. And I think it's much more easy to say it's work on CubeSpray, work with the latest image on GC, on Packet, on OpenStack, and we just report that to the test grind, rather than starting job on the test grind that do all of that. I don't know.
I think the biggest benefit, the major benefit was knowing that you could always deploy the latest version of Kubernetes using CubeSpray. That was kind of the biggest thing that we were looking for. And if it's periodic, then we don't care. Like if it's periodic and reported via sort of federated testing into test grid, just so that folks have a signal at the end of the release cycle to say, oh, this deployment tool is totally failing, we don't know why. And we can poke somebody to say like, hey, the latest version of Kubernetes before we're gonna go to release has some key problem with this deployer tool.
So if we don't test by PR, we can just update the status of the latest release of Kubernetes.
So it's not via PR, it would be periodic. So the way the test grid periodic jobs work is they basically pull master of latest Kubernetes every time windowed segment, and then it builds and deploys that via standard sort of, it has its own deployment on GCE right now. And you can have other things to deploy to other targets, like COPS does it for AWS, obviously. And then it runs the end-to-end test suite and then reports the results back. Now you can also do this via federated testing, where you just basically report your data to test grid via a GCS bucket and a well-defined semantics. Right? Both would be adequate and useful for CI signal as part of the release process.
Okay, I need to think a bit more.
Okay, how about we talk about it maybe next time and then follow up on the PR. I can loop you into that PR that River Zang did.
Yeah, okay. I think the PR is not going to work. There is not going to launch anything. There is no integration to provision the cluster, anything. So
Justin?
need more work.
Yeah, I actually would be in favor of like moving to kind and doing less of the cloud tests. Like today we have something where AWS lost all quota, and so like I'm pretty sure we're failing. Like I'm amazed we're passing any PRs, but apparently we're still passing some. Apparently people are hitting retest enough. But I think the thing which I would find useful when I'm looking at it, like for example an AWS PR, is to be able to ask for that test to be run. And like we've had this on other ones where like it's very difficult to, you see a PR that's introducing a test and you have no idea whether it looks right, but you don't know whether it's gonna pass when it's run for real, and there's no way to run that test before it. So I don't know whether we can do something where we're able to like request a particular test to run that would not normally run, like so that we're able to, like, if it's a new serial test, we're able to like run the serial test suite, or if it's a new AWS test, we're able to like selectively run the AWS test, or if it's a performance thing, we need to run the performance benchmark. I guess that's a topic for SIG testing, but I would love to see that before I think if we had that, I would be very comfortable with making like most of the cloud things into periodics.
Yeah, this is a meta problem. It has to be discussed with SIG testing, and yeah, there were many proposals to remove the code-specific tests from pre-submits, but I think the discussion went nowhere. Uh, this has to be revisited eventually. Like your proposal sounds good. Definitely, on demand, like testing is nice to have feature.
I think it's almost critical because we've gotten into this state we've been in this state for a long time. It's almost pathological, where people do /retest, like all the time, over and over and over again to try and get something. I was even going to make a joke T-shirt for KubeCon /retest LGTM merged, yay! But it's frustrating for developers, and it's not. I don't think it's beneficial for anyone, especially from a cost perspective. I can't imagine what people are paying for on the back end for some of this stuff.
Some of the other like offenders here is the integration tests we have, and Kind is not going to help with those, or they are not code provider specific. They are just flaky. The pull integration tests. So one problem with Kind is, I don't know, I think Ben is currently busy with something else, but Kind does not support multi-nodes currently. What do you guys think about the requirement for multi-nodes?
Well, for the intent test suite to pass properly in the future, it will require multi-node. So in order for you to get a conformance run, a full conformance run, it has to be multi-node because there's certain sets of tests that are required more than one node.
Currently, Ben is saying that I think the base conformance suite is passing for him. I'm not sure how that's possible, given it's single node.
Well, we haven't fixed all of the tests yet. We had a conversation on SIGARCH just last week about this very topic. So.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do it for 113, but I think Kind is pretty close to being, like having the spotlight, like you said, in that issue we discussed.
I think my goal of talking about it within the SIG is to understand what the time horizons will be and whether or not there are interested parties to help move their jobs to periodics to help get people out of the blocking merge queue problem and to try and accelerate the turn that it takes so that way we have less churn from both approvers and reviewers, higher signal to noise ratio, and just increasing the overall throughput of the project and decreasing the amount of time folks have to spend on a per PR basis, right?
Yeah, maybe we can start like with a couple of jobs, Kind-based jobs, and experiment with those. And like if we are confident about Kind, we can say to interested people like, hey, it's now time to possibly move to periodics using Kind.
So just so folks are aware, there is a SIG testing meeting this afternoon. It is at 1 p.m. Pacific time, Pacific Standard Time now. Yeah, so that's it. That's GMT -8. Are there any other topics? Otherwise, we can get a whopping 10 minutes back. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.